Hello there, I'm Sarah from the Stitchery Dorset, and I've been promising for ages to do a tutorial on how to make the Patchwork project bag. So this finishes up at a size of 14.5 inches wide by 11 inches tall. It's fully lined inside, and it's all enclosed lining inside as well. And then it's just got a lovely easy zip fastening. Okay, so you're going to need some supplies to make your project bag. I've used a pack of mini charm pack from Moda for my bag, but you can use anything which is a 2.5 inch square, some offcuts, the end of a jelly roll, whatever you have lying around. But this does give you a good variation of different colours all in one little pack. What else you will need, sorry I keep looking down at my little list. A backing fabric, you'll need about a fat quarter for something as your backing fabric. I'm using the lovely llamas from Riley Blake. Got that in stock at the moment, it's really pretty. And then you're going to need a 1/2 metre of fusible interfacing, or a fusible inter wadding, as I like to call it. This is a Pellon Legacy High Loft fusible wadding, and that always looks really well on bags. And then you're going to need a 1/2 metre of your lining fabric for the actual inside of the bag, and I've used an AGF solid, which is called, the shade colour is Banana, which is really nice with this range. The only other thing that you're going to need as well as that is a 14-inch zip. I'm just using a white one, YKK, easy to sew over if you need to, but you don't need to with this one. And that's it for the supplies. And then we've got additional items, not essential items, but just ones that I like to use whenever I'm doing a project. I like to use the non-stick pressing sheet, which is from June Taylor. This is my one. It's looking a little bit worse for wear, but it still works perfectly well. Really good. And then I also use the Patchwork magic pins from Taylor Seville. These are mine, and these are really sharp. Really good for anything which you just want to, they've got a really good grip to them as well, which is good. Mary Ellen's Best Press. This one is Tea Rose Garden, so I always use that when I'm going to be spraying it onto the wadding later. I'll use that. In fact, I use it in this misting bottle, which is something which we also stock, which is really good for making a fine mist and making a bottle of this go so much further. I think that's everything that we use. Oh, and Aurifil sewing thread. That's the other thing which I'm using today. So I've got the colour 2021, and it's a 50 weight Aurifil sewing thread on the machine. Right, I've laid out all of my blocks, how I want them to be. I've done it on my board. You can see them all there. I'm going to start down this bottom row and start joining them together. Before I do that, I'm just going to let you know a few little bits. So along the width, it's 7 squares wide, and height is 5 squares high. When you're joining the rows together, when you get to the top row, that one needs to be just kept separate on its own, because that then forms the piece above the zip. Okay, but the rest of them we're going to join together. So, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm just going to pick up my pieces. Because these are perfectly matched from the charm pack, this works really well, because you just have to match it up along the side. and just start sewing. So I'm going to carry on along this bottom row, and then once I've done this bottom row, I'll carry on up through and then join these 4 rows together. Okay, so I've sewn the squares together, so these are now 7 squares across, and I've done them all in their rows, and I'm pressing these open because when you're then ironing it down onto the fusible pellon, it does make it sit flatter on those seams, so you don't even notice that the seams are even there really. So just carry on and just iron this row. I will do the same to the other rows as well. So this is my 2 bottom rows. I'm not using any steam because I don't want to distort the blocks in any way. I'm just using a hot iron. This is set to the cotton setting. Okay, so that's my 2 bottom rows. That's my bottom left hand corner, if you can see that from there. I'm just going to join these together, and I'm just going to show you how I match up my seams. So I fold down the top layer, match it up to the one underneath, and pin it as close as I can to that intersection. I'll just do the same the whole way along, matching them all up, and that just means I tend to get it to match better at the intersections that way, just by pinning really, really close. To those seams. Match that one up. And then when I'm sewing this down through to join both strips together, I will remove the pin only when I'm really close to it, so really up next to it. I'm not using a foot with a guide on the side of it, but if you were, then just make sure that your pins don't go any higher than your fabric, otherwise you'll end up hitting them on the guide and it can throw your fabric out of line. Okay, so that is ready to sew together. So, try not to get my hand in the way. So I sew right up to the pin. Pop it out. And just carry it on all the way along. And that's the good thing about these pins, because they have this ridged, I don't know if you can see it, this ridged, oh, it's going to focus maybe? Maybe too close. It's got a ridged section on the top of it, and it's really easy to pull out of the fabrics, which we always want things which are easier. Just match that little last corner. Okay, the moment of truth. Yeah, they're all matched beautifully. So that's good. So that's my first 2 rows. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to iron that seam open as well, and then I'm going to finish off these next 2 exactly the same way, but just remembering not to include that one. I'll iron it all flat, but I just won't include that top one. Okay, see you in a mo. Right, I've sewn all the squares together, as you can see. I've done all my seams open on the back. So that's the lower part of the bag, and that's the bit above the zip. So what I'm going to do first of all is turn them both over. I'm going to get my Mary Ellen's Best Press. This is really good because it's a really fine misting and it just goes for ages. Just making it slightly damp to make it easier to adhere to the pellin. My piece of pellin, and this is the bobbly side up, so this is going to be the adhesive side essentially. Now what we do is we pop these onto here and line these up so that, if you can see, the seams match from these top bits right the way down through to the bottom. And that's because when we quilt it, it will be much easier to do it all as one piece. This is my non-stick pressing sheet. I'm going to stick that over the whole thing, and then with a hot iron, don't need any steam, I'm going to start in the middle and just work my way across the actual fabrics. And this just makes a really good interfacing. It kind of gives the bag a bit of substance. Give it a good press. The really good thing about this sheet is that it's easy to peel off afterwards. Sorry, my arm's in the way. Move those pins out the way. The clunking is the cat flap opening. That's our dog going in and out. Right. Just do, oh, pardon you, Chewy. Nearly there. Let's give it a really good press all over. Make sure it's all stuck down. Right, let's have a look. Oh, I might need a little bit more just there in that corner. Give it a bit more heat. Better. Right, and that are those 2 pieces adhered to the pellin. And what I'll do now is I will start here with my 1/4 inch seam away from the where they join, go all the way down through, back up through this side, across the top, back down and around. So that way you get a nice continuous seam and you can do this bit at the same time as you're doing that bit. Right, I'll get my sewing machine set up and then I shall be back in just a moment. Right, so I thought I'd just show you what I mean by the sewing down through. So this is a 1/4 inch actual foot on my machine. So all I'm going to do is just line this up to the side of my original seam. Actually, I can use a slightly longer sewing stitch for this because we're just doing the quilting part. So I'll go up to 2.5 mil. I can just keep on going right the way down through. And I can come right off the bottom, go across a couple of stitches, and then come back up the other side. So when I was sewing the pieces together, I was using a 1.5 mil stitch. So I'll stop there and just turn it round and then do the next two pieces. Oh, that's come off. Right off the end. Turn it round. And there we go. And I'll carry that along the width. I might just re-stick those couple of bits down there. They need to just be re-adhered back down again. And I'll finish that off. I'll go up and down and then side to side, obviously not on the top bit and not on this bit, but you just start here or start down the bottom and just work your way backwards and forwards across each of these. That gives you your quilted bag top. Okay, I shall be back with that completed in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so I've sewn all the top stitching down, all the quilting is now done. It looks quite nice. So now I need to trim this up into the two separate pieces, which means trimming around this part and trimming around this part. Also what I've done is on the backing fabric, this is the back of the bag, which is the lovely llamas. I've also put the, oh, there's a hair there. I've also put the pellin onto the back of that piece of fabric as well. Got that all nicely stuck down. All the sizes are going to be listed just after this section. So all the cutting sizes, we'll put them all here. Right, so what I'll do is I'll flip my June Taylor quilters mat over and I'll turn it around slightly, I think. Because they're all lined up, makes it nice and simple to be able to trim this down. So I'm using a 6.5 inch by 24 inch ruler and also a nice sharp, I think this is a prim one, it says Olfa but it is a prim one, cutting rotary cutter. So I trim all around the sides first. And the top. And then we're going to trim in between these two sections. I think I might pull that up, turn it round. Okay. So at this point, you just want to make sure that you've got your fabrics the right way up. So let's just check that. and this fabric has got some writing in, so I'm going with the writing up and the same on the top. So there are also instructions on the cuttings for the linings, and for this next phase, putting in the zip, we're going to need the lining for the top section, which is cut slightly larger, and the lining for the bottom section. So we're going to then move on now to putting the zip in. Okay. Okay, we're going to prepare the zip now to put it into the bag. So what I do is I put on the end of my zip one square which I've cut in half, which gives you a nice finish to the end of the zip on either side. I'll show you how to do that. So it's one square, you cut it down through the middle. As these are 2.5 inches square, you need to cut this at 1.25. That's better, I can see the measurements are better that side. I've changed to a smaller ruler just because it's just easier. There we go. Flip this mat back over to the ironing side. Got my two pieces, one for either end of the zip. Fold them in half and then just iron that. Fold that one in half, do the same. Give it a good press. Okay, and then what we do is we fold these into the centre. And you can either do one side at a time, or you can do both sides at the same time, whichever you prefer. I will do one side at a time. Does give a better finish. Spin it around. Do the other side. And the same on the other piece. Spin that around. Fold them up so that they are like a piece of binding. Give them one more little press over. Okay, so on the zip we're going to just need to trim off the end just a little bit, because if you put it in as it was now, that wouldn't quite slide and sit in there nicely. So I just trim the very end off. It doesn't have to be very much, just 1/4 inch off, but that just gives you an extra, just sits in there nicer. Okay, pop a pin in to hold it in place. I'll pop on that side because I can hold that side. Now I've changed my foot to zipper foot, and I need that now for a little while. So what I'm going to do, do a couple of backward stitches, secure it all down, right up to the pin again. Trim that bit of thread. That's one end done. We'll do exactly the same on the other side. Open the zip down. Oops, trim that one off and that one off. So with this end, what I tend to do is do one side first. You don't want to sew over the metal bit. I'll pop a pin in there. And do that bit first. Secure it by going backwards and forwards a couple of times. Put that pin out now. So once you've gone over that central bit, lift up your foot, just pop the other side of the zip in next to the first bit, like so. And then carry on sewing right the way across. And that is the other side done. Trim off your long stitches. Okay, you might have a bit overhanging on the sides, and I would just trim those edges off just to make it easier to line your zip up. And the same at this end. Need to pop a pair of scissors, don't I? Right, that's that done. One zip prepared. Okay, so top of the bag. Make sure I've got my writing out the right way. That's the top, going down this way. I like my zips to open so they open this end and close at this end. So position along the length of the fabric. This is longer, so you just have to overhang it a little bit at either end. So that's your sandwich. I'll show you that a bit more close up. So you've got your quilted fabric, your zip, laying with the teeth facing that fabric, then your lining fabric on the top. Now some people like to pin this, some people don't. I think the pins get in the way when I'm putting a zip in, so I don't tend to, but do whatever is easiest for you. I'm going to carry on as I work my way down through, just lining it all up. I'll do my zip up a bit further. And when you get down towards the teeth, foot down, or your needle down, lift up your foot. This one goes up double the height, luckily. And then open your zip past the zipper foot. Reposition back down where you want it to be. And then just continue sewing that last little bit. And just backwards and forwards a little bit at the end. Okay. So that's one side of the zipper in. So we will finger press. Make sure it's all nice and flat where you want it. And then get the iron on there. And just make sure it's all nice and flat at the back as well. And iron that down through on that side. Right, so that's one side of your zip done. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to top stitch, but I'm going to start my top stitching where this stitching comes across the end of the zip and start it at that location and come down through this side. So I'm not going right the way up to the end. And there's a reason for that in the construction of the bag. Oh, let's do it around the other way. Okay. That's it. So I'm just doing it basically the width of the actual foot away. And this just finishes off the top of the quilting effect as well. same, we finish right there where this sewing comes in from the zipper end piece. Okay, so that's that bit done. One half of the zip complete. That's the top part. Right, bottom part. So again, making sure that you've got it up the right way. Kind of line up where your lines are at the top and the bottom. Doesn't have to be precise, but it's always nice to get them sort of lined up if you can. Flip that over. We're going to be starting at this end this time, so I'm going to open that zip up. Your lining fabric on the inside. Pick up all 3 layers. Make sure they're all lined up. And then again, go down this side. Bit of back stitching to start with. And then line it all up as you go down through. Getting down towards that zip now, so I need to needle down, foot up, open that zip out of the way, or close that zip out of the way. Down to the end, little back stitch. Okay, open that side up, that's the lining. And again, we'll give this a good iron. It's easier if you've got the zip done up for this part. Just pull the lining down slightly. Give that a little press. Flip that over. And then again, top stitching from exactly the same place, right at the top here, where that other stitching matches up, and just start there. So again, not near the end, but just in where the other stitching finishes. My squares have matched up really well from either side of the zip. I'm quite surprised. That's good. I shouldn't be surprised. They look pretty good. And again, finishing just where that other stitching on the zip is. So that is the front of your bag. Now, if I haven't added on any loops or anything else onto my bag, but at this point, if you wanted to add on a loop here to hold it with, or on this side or anything else, then this is the time to do it. So what we need to do now is just trim down the lining fabric so as it's a similar size to the actual main front of the bag. So I can flip this over, turn this around slightly, and just grab my longer ruler and just trim along. If you find the zip is in your way, then you can kind of just press closer to the side, and then it kind of lifts up over the zip and out of your way. Run that down through there again. Okay, do the bottom. Caught. And then I'm going to just move that zip halfway along and out of the way. Trim that off. You don't want to trim off the edge of your bit that you've carefully folded over if you can avoid it, but it doesn't really matter, but just gives it a nice finish on the end if you can avoid that bit. Right, so that is the front of the project bag finished. So I'll get my pieces ready to do the back piece now, and I should be back in a mo. Right, I'm now going to do the lining of the bag. So we finished the front, pop that up there for a second. This is the piece of lining fabric. Again, measurements will be provided. Lay your bag over the top of the lining fabric with plenty of space around the edges. Hopefully you can see that. I've allowed, shall I move the sewing machine over? There you go. Might be able to see it a bit better now. I've given a good amount of space all around the edges, probably about 3/4 of an inch all the way around. So what we need to do now is fold the bag front out of the way, and there's a, where this meets the fold for the zip, right in that folded section you can see the stitching on this side, because you didn't sew right up to the end when putting the zip in. You can get right up into that crease to make a nice join. So I'm going to pin, and it is easier to do to put the lining in first, because when you've got two pieces which have already been interfaced with a wadding, it's a bit trickier. So I would recommend that you do this bit first. We leave a space at the bottom to turn it inside out, about 3 or 4 inches. And then pin up around the sides. And again, right up into the crease where the zip joins. I'll bring that up close to the camera once I've got it all pinned. Pull that bit down at the front and then do the same around the top section. So the lining fabric is down on the other piece of lining fabric, nice and flat. Pin it into the corners, a couple of pins across the top, and one in either of those little creases. This side. Now I'm just going to show you up close where that little crease is, so you can just pull that open and you will see the seam from where you've put the zip in. Because you didn't go right up to the end, you can open that right out and start sewing right at that point, about 1/4 of an inch in. I tend to do the lining so as it's slightly smaller. So if you go slightly over the 1/4 of an inch, it's better, because that way your lining is a bit smaller than the main bag, which it should be really, so make it look nice. So I'm going to start up at the top piece, pop that under, and just put your needle down right in that crease. Couple of back stitches, up through to this first corner, spin that around, and again, as I said, just make it slightly wider than the 1/4 of an inch. and it will sit nicely inside of your bag. Go over that bit of wadding, and I can get right into that crease again on this side. A couple more stitches. That's it. And then we fold that back up, fold this one up, and start again. Go around the bottom section. Again, right into that crease. Put your needle down first. Does help to do that. That's it, and right in the right place. Again, just slightly over the 1/4 inch. Down the corner, the bottom. And this is where we're leaving the gap in the bottom to turn it all right side out. So I'll just sew back there and then go along to this section. Back stitch a little bit. Up to the corner. AGF fabric is so soft, it's lovely to work with, makes a beautiful lining, it's also beautiful to quilt with. And again, right into that okay, if you can see that, that's right up into the where that would join, so I haven't gone further over, so there's no stitching showing on this side. So let's trim down the lining section. What I tend to do is move the upper section out of the way and just trim it down to the same size as the original piece. Do the top bit next, fold that bit back, and again it's a bit bumpy, so just hold it nearer to the edge, mind your fingers, don't get your fingers in the way. And down this side first. This side isn't too bad because the zip is up the other end at the moment, but what we will need to do next is to open the zip. But we'll do that once we've pinned some of the bits in place. Okay, open that up slightly so we can just trim down this side. Oh, I've just trimmed off that little bit there. That's okay, we can fix that in a minute. We're sewing it together. Okay, so that's the bag essentially lined, but it hasn't got a back. So let's put the back on. So, move that out of the way. Spin this around. Shall I move the machine over slightly so that you can see a little bit more what I'm doing? That's better. Okay. Right, so the same with the backing, with the proper bag, back as I like to call it. Position it, so what we need to do, so we need to have this zip opened, but not all the way, just part of the way. And then position this in the centre. Again, you should have about 3/4 inch all the way around, which is excess fabric. Get my pins. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to pull the yellow up. We're going to go right up into that crease. And we're going to start there and pin it down. All the way around. Let's move that around and make it slightly easier. Do that side first, I think. That corner. Right, up into the crease again. Along the bottom. And then the same at the top. Make sure it's all pulled out nice and flat. Up through to the top corner. You just want to keep the lining out of the way whilst you're sewing the backing on. Couple of pins in the top and one pin just in that crease again. Okay, so I'm going to start sewing at this point. We don't need to leave any gap on this section. We can just go straight the way round. And this time I will do a 1/4 inch seam because that will make it nice and finished off with the other pieces in the actual quilted top. Now, a little trick at the corners. I've stopped knowing that I've got a bit more than a 1/4 inch when I turn around this side. Now the reason for that is if I do one stitch across the corner on the diagonal, it will mean that that corner will turn out much easier when you turn it the right way around. Same on this corner. So if I was to go straight up through that side, it's just slightly wider, so I'm just going to do it on the diagonal again. One stitch, and that'll make it easier to turn the corners out. Right, up into this folded section, right up to that seam again with the zip joins. And what I tend to do on this side of fabric, where I have done that one diagonal stitch across the corner, I actually sew diagonally across the corners, because we're going to have to trim that fabric off of the corner, because otherwise it will be too much fabric in that space. But that just reinforces that section. And then up to the top and just round this last section at the top. Put my needle down right at that junction again. Do one diagonal. to that last end. Okay, and what I will do, the same as I did on the bottom corners, I'll just go diagonally across on those corner pieces just to reinforce. Okay, so we will do the same as we did with the lining, and now we can trim off the excess fabric. That's it. Didn't sound like it had cut the first time. Do the other side. And then just up through the sides. Okay. What we also need to do is just to trim off these corners. I just need a pair of scissors. Right, let's grab a pair of scissors. Just trim these off on the edges, so as they're just a couple of mil away from your stitches. One more. Right, so that's the bag pretty much finished. We'll turn it the right way out. Pop the corners out first. So you're pulling it through the zip as well. Pop your corners out at the top with your finger to start with. This is a good point to just make sure that you've caught everything into your seams. All looks good. Yeah, I'll get my pokey stick, which is an old children's paintbrush. Just pop that into the corners and just pop them out, and it just gives you a much nicer corner where you've done that little diagonal stitch in the corner. Give you a little extra space. One more. Okay. So your lining fabric, let's open that zip up fully now. Pop the corners out of your lining. And what you want to do is just fold in the edges along that bottom piece and just pop a couple of pins in to close up that gap. I'm going to pop one, it's only 1/4 inch seam at the bottom here, or just over, so you don't want to go too far into your fabric. Okay, one more up this side. there. And what I'm going to do to make it look nice and neat inside, I'm not just going to stitch over this part, I'm going to stitch from right down here all the way across. Just using probably about a 1/8 of a seam allowance. And any of the little loose threads can just be trimmed off at this point. So that looks nice and neat across the bottom. Whoops, there you go. I'll just trim that one thread off at the end. Okay, with the lining out, I tend to then give the bag a press. Move the sewing machine around slightly at this point because we don't need that now. Okay, so you want to roll your fabric so that it makes it nice and square along the bottom, and then just give it a good iron. And the same up the sides. And also this side. My arm is in the way, isn't it? Try not to get my arm in the way. It's the trouble with being left-handed. Give it another quick iron down the bottom. It looks nice in the back. And then just do the same with this top bit. And just pop the lining out of the way. And roll that into position. And just that little bit on the side. And then tuck your lining inside of your bag, right down to the corners and into the top corners. And there you have your project bag. What I might do, because I did snip the thread on the edge of this section here, this tiny bit here, I might just sew a couple of hand stitches in there on the edge, but it probably won't go anywhere anyway. You've got a lovely fully lined project bag ready to go. So when you get your mini charm pack, it comes with 42 pieces of fabric, and in this you'll notice use 35 for the front and 1 to do each end of the zip. So with those extra 6 pieces you can make a little purse in exactly the same way, but with those 6 pieces at the bottom and a plain piece of the fabric at the top. And that's really good for keeping your scissors, needles, other bits and pieces in away from the rest of your project. So you can use every single piece of your fabric in the charm pack. And of course you can make them to whatever size you want to make them as well. So that was the first one that I made in that fabric. This is the one that we've done today. Well, I hope you enjoyed our video, and please do check back in to see us again when we do more videos and our previous ones. Thank you for joining us.